Alright, you already know who it is. Jason Demers! Oh, you thought I was going to say Jason Derulo, eh? No, you're dumb to think that. It says in the title and the thumbnail, Jason Demers. In fact, who even is Jason Derulo anyway? Let's talk today about Jason Demers, because what we had ourselves was a really interesting little podcast hosted by Tony Marinaro here. He is the guy who works for TSN 690, and he has his own show, the Sick Podcast, on the side, where he had current NHL free agent Jason Demers as a guest on the show. Now, it's really interesting how this goes about, because what we had that actually sparked this entire idea was Philippe Bernard, who was a listener of the show. He tweeted out this: veteran right-handed defenseman Jason Demers, who grew up a Canadiens fan, mentions he would love to play for his hometown team. He would also be open to a PTO if it came down to it. And in fact, linked is the video of the podcast itself where Tony Marinaro actually goes out there and he says, "Okay, Demers, repeat after me. I, Jason Demers, from Dorval, Quebec, would love to play for the Montreal Canadiens." And Demers, because it's kind of, it's a funny little thing, he goes out there and he says it verbatim, word for word. He repeats after what Marinaro tells him to talk about. So it's not like Jason Demers went on to a show and he is like, yeah, Montreal, I really want to go to Montreal. It would be fantastic to play with Montreal because I cheered for these guys growing up. I love them. No, it wasn't particularly that. It was the host kind of just playing around and having some fun where Demers was in on the joke. But either way, Demers in Montreal is actually a pretty interesting idea, and in fact, it kind of coincides with another idea as to where Jason Demers could end up and start playing hockey in 2021-2022. Let's also talk about the Edmonton Oilers, because they're another team that apparently could see some benefits should a Demers kind of player be on their radar for a possible PTO. There, in fact, was an article published by Kevin Lowe yesterday in The Athletic discussing the idea of Demers over to the Oilers, and there had been Oilers fans talking a whole bunch about how Jason Demers would potentially be a solid fit as well. So hey, if we're talking about the player, why not talk about him with not only the Canadiens, because he had that statement himself that he said on the podcast, but also Edmonton as well. Let's just go over the profile here for Mr. Demers. He is a 33-year-old right-handed defenseman, 6'1", 194, from Dorval, Quebec. He's a guy who was drafted all the way back in 2008 in the 7th round by the Sharks, where he spent the majority of his NHL career. Actually, is that even true now? Oh my goodness, no, it's not. He spent 6 seasons with the San Jose Sharks full-time, but ever since then, a year with Dallas, a year with Florida, and then 4 more years with Arizona. My goodness, half his career was with the San Jose Sharks, and the other half was elsewhere. I could have sworn that Jason Demers was a lifetime Shark who had just happened to be off the other teams for the ending parts of his career. But my gosh, once this 2021-2022 season completes, he will officially have spent less than half of his career in San Jose. That's crazy to me. I've always kind of seen Demers as a Shark in my mind's eye, but either way, he was always a pretty solid, pretty capable right-handed defenseman, pretty decent size, pretty decent mobility and puck rushing ability. He was never really a goal scorer, although he did get 9 goals in 2017. He had a pretty alright shot when he used it, but his bread and butter was just there being a capable defenseman who could chip in on offensive rushes once in a while. As we noted, he indeed is a UFA. His previous contract was 5 years long, signed by the Florida Panthers back in 2016. He had a $4.5 million AAV, but partway through that contract, he ended up on the Arizona Coyotes because immediately after he signed the contract, he got sent over in a trade for Jamie McGinn, who actually wasn't really terrible for the Panthers. I think he had like a 30-point season when he was over there. Either way, Jason Demers spent out the rest of his contract with the Arizona Coyotes, putting up an Arizona career high of 20 points in 69 games played. That was the first season he'd spent in Arizona in 2017-2018. Now, the Coyotes haven't really been all too great of a team. As of late, he had 4 points in 41 games in the most recent season of play. But at the same time, it is Arizona that he was suiting up for, the team that is now in a rebuild. They had no real reason to keep holding on to Jason Demers, which is why he is a UFA, but because of his poor showcase in the most previous season of play, he doesn't have a contract. No team is going out there shelling big bucks to him. He was making 4.5 for 5 seasons previously, so at 33 years old, it's not like he's going to go out there and expect something like that for 2021-2022. Which is why, if there is a team going out there in a PTO situation saying, hey, Jason Demers is out here and he seems like a pretty good fit, I honestly think there is a good amount of value there that would justify a PTO spot if any team goes out there and tries to acquire him. He is only a few years removed from being a pretty capable offensively producing defenseman. 20 points in 69 games played is a pretty good rate for sure. And he is a guy who can provide some pretty good depth experience if you play him, let's say, in your bottom pairing or somewhere as a depth 7th defenseman kind of guy. He's not going to be all too expensive, and he's going to have himself all that experience and knowledge to pass on should an organization take on his services. For Montreal, it's a really interesting fit because not only is he a guy from Quebec who would love to play for the Canadiens, from his own words, totally not filled into his mouth by Tony Marinaro, but the Canadiens do indeed have a pretty interesting right-handed defenseman situation. You have Brett Kulak, you have Alexander Romanov, these guys can play right, but when it comes to the mainstay right-handed guys, guess who it is? It's Shea Weber? Oh no, he's not there anymore. And it's Jeff Petrie. You also have yourselves the acquisition of David Savard, and then of course you have Weidman from the KHL, which, I mean, I said in the video when he was acquired, it's a KHL guy who is really good in the KHL, but just because you were great in the KHL does not mean you're going to be fantastic in the NHL. It's just not a guarantee. So Montreal does have some room, I guess, to potentially experiment. If you wanted to say Jason Demers would be a good PTO kind of guy, just to bring him onto the team, have him try out in training camp, see what he's about, and you like what you see, there's no harm, no foul over there. That last right-handed defenseman spot for the Montreal Canadiens should not in any way be considered a lock for Weidman or for Kulak or whoever. So, a guy like Jason Demers, in my opinion, if you wanted to say it would work, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you, to be honest. Now, for Edmonton, this is a little bit of a different situation here because the Oilers have themselves a right side that is supposed to be assembled with Barrie, Ceci, and Evan Bouchard. Forget the fact that you have a whole bunch of former Toronto Maple Leafs over here, including Zach Hyman, but that was supposed to be kind of the framework of the right side for Edmonton. They really wanted to go out there and give Evan Bouchard the opportunity to really work at his game this season, and the expectation would probably be that as he goes on, he gets better, he gets more points, he gets more power play time, and by the middle of the season, maybe the end of the season, he's already in the top 4 spot over Cody Ceci, maybe even, best case scenario, he's above Tyson Barrie in the depth chart, which, I mean, it'd be tough to do when he was the top point producer out of all defensemen last season, wasn't he? Either way, though, there's already 3 competitive guys in that spot. So for Demers, it would really have to be a 7th defenseman kind of role, okay, if somebody gets injured, you're in Demers. Like, that is automatic, you are the guy. If one of Barrie, Bouchard, or Ceci cannot play this hockey game here tonight, that would be the only real fit that I would say that Demers would appropriately fill with the Edmonton Oilers. But at the end of the day, you know, Jason Demers brings a pretty interesting element to that team on the right side that is not really filled out there by the Cecis or the Bouchards or the Barries in general. Bouchard and Barrie are both very effective, offensively capable defensemen. That was Barrie's entire niche the previous season. Evan Bouchard, if he pans out, he is going to be that and more with a better shot. Demers isn't really like that. He's a little bit more defensively capable, I think. He's mobile in a sense where his defensive positioning is pretty good. His foot speed isn't the best, but he still has himself an ability to move around the ice effectively despite the lack of north-south acceleration. So that is kind of a skill set that I think you could argue the Oilers could use a little bit more of since they're so offensively leaning, yet they cannot keep the puck out of their own net, which is kind of why a lot of people are blaming, okay, it's defense, it's goaltending, it's this, it's that, it's depth forwards. Edmonton can score all right with McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and all those guys. It's just, what have they done to keep the puck out of their own net and help them win some playoff rounds? Not all too much, you would say. So, I don't want to make it seem like Jason Demers is going to be the be-all and end-all solution once you get Demers, all of a sudden, boom, 3rd-round appearance right there. But he would be a kind of guy that I think would help out in that respect. So, for Oilers fans to go out there and talk about how they need to sign Jason Demers to a PTO, it's not surprising to me. He was playing in Arizona last season, he didn't really showcase all too well, but then again, nobody on the Coyotes really showed off all too well, aside from Jacob Chychrun, I guess. But this is a guy who has himself a pretty good chance at having himself an NHL job next season, but he said it himself, he's open to a PTO. So whether that's Montreal because he wants to play for his hometown team, whether that's Edmonton because they need right-side defensemen that can actually play defensively, we'll see. But talk to me in the comments if you're an Oilers fan or if you're a Canadiens fan. What are your thoughts on Jason Demers and his entire profile? Would you like to see this kind of guy suited for your hockey team? If he does a PTO and he does well in your training camp, what is the max contract you would want to give to this guy? Because at the end of the day, you know, PTO is free, but it's just that, a PTO, a professional tryout. You would still need to sign him to a regular contract afterwards, should you actually like his services and want to retain him for the year. Talk to me in the comments. What do you think? I hope you enjoyed this video. Rolls 99. And bye.